Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two, and figuring out just what is going on is always a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan. This episode we are reading More Perfect by Temi Oh, stopping just before part 2. So this is our first, I think, full-on sci-fi book that we've done on the podcast so far. Am I right about that?
Yeah, it's like actually dystopian, I guess. We've gotten hints of that with like If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, whatever it was called,
Yeah.
where something goes wrong, but this is like alternate universe type of situation. I still wouldn't consider it maybe like entirely sci-fi. I guess it is. It has technology we don't have, I guess, but
It's like a futuristic sci-fi. Like I often was thinking about The Matrix as as kind of being in the same category. This one's more realistic, but
yeah, I guess it just feels slightly weird because it's like mentioning dates that aren't that distant, like 2025, and which is where we are, and they're in like 2050, I think, is when they are.
that's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah.
They hop around a bit. I can't remember if that's where they end up, but that would sound right.
Yeah. Which would have felt far away, but now it's like, oh my god, I'm almost 30, you know?
Yeah, well, and the book wasn't released that long ago. I think it was 2023. So
yeah.
it seems the author pretty intentionally chose a near future. And like there's real life current people referred to as, I think, alive in it. Like Jeff Bezos was mentioned, and Zuckerberg as both having technological influence still. So I don't know if the implication is like the author saying they think this could happen per se, like this quickly, but definitely like I guess the author wanted it to be still relatable to the current time.
To be fair, there is a lot of comparison we can make between what's happening in this book and what we are experiencing now. Not necessarily that we all have like chips in our head, even though that's what some people would like to believe.
Yeah.
But there have been like tests for that.
Think about that.
Yeah. There have been tests for that kind of technology.
Right.
I think
yeah,
fatal
like the
tests.
Neuralink stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which haven't turned out, but like that is the goal, quote unquote, the goal for like certain people. Even if it is like dystopian.
Yeah. It is effectively paralleling phones now, right? As far as the thing you always have on you and kind of are viewing the world through its lens. So
yeah.
The parallels are not lost, even if it's not exactly what we have. But that's a good point. I kind of forgot about like people actually trying to do this neurological linking to technology business.
Yeah.
And with that, maybe we can get into the neurological technology business that happens in this book. So there's this device that's introduced pretty much right at the beginning of the book called the Pulse, that's implanted into folks' brains, particularly to connect to their memories through the hippocampus part of the brain. And it's connected to a greater internet too, called the Panopticon, and that's kind of what people are interacting with through the Pulse, both visually, but also like, I guess, kind of mentally, because they can connect with one another in this world, connect to the greater world, kind of just through the mind, where vision is really only the interface that they're experiencing with it. So
it's kind of wild that people are just like, yes, let me be viewed at all times by everyone else.
Because it kind of implies a surveillance, right? Of like,
yeah,
Panopticon. I guess two readings of it. One is like you being able to see everything, but it's everything being able to see everything. So that kind of implies a watching of you in your life.
And then it's like not even just like a watching of action, but it is connected to the brain, right? So you are seeing memories and you are sharing memories, and those memories are also being altered and shifted, sometimes without your consent. And it's just like, at that point, what about you becomes genuine, like through the aspect of shame and being judged, but also through like this government control, not even just surveillance, but like control, because they are influencing you and you wouldn't even be able to really notice.
Yeah, I guess there's one quote that I'm vaguely remembering from the book about this, where like it's like just escaping me now. God damn it. I had it like while I was listening to you, and of course by the time it was done I forgot it.
There is one that's like, in the Panopticon, you're the best version of yourself.
Maybe it was, it's pretty similar to that. There was one where they were like something about putting your full self on display is like the best version of accountability. It might be at the same time that was said, something like that. I know that's not the words that they used, but it's like being like, if you're being watched, like you're more likely to be on your best behavior, which like is not, we know that's not true from social media already, but that's maybe a reasoning behind it. It is just kind of a crazy concept, this technology of like always being connected, like to a point where you kind of can't opt out. And like we'll talk more about that for sure with total adoption, but like once you've opted in, it's really hard to separate yourself. Like going dark is not common, and like and some people have to do it in illicit ways to fully do it, you know. So like to be fully on display, like one of the things that really stuck out to me about it was the constellation aspect, like the lights that you can see from the device, and how they kind of put on display your emotional response to the things people are saying around you. It feels extremely vulnerable compared to how people interact now. Like without these devices, sure, you can see body language, you can kind of see those little reactions on people's faces. And supposedly humans are good at doing that. I'm not sure how much that's true, but like that's the way we do it now, but it's much more obscured. It's not a thing we consciously notice. Like the constellation is really putting you on blast when you see other people's light up or not light up at something.
Yeah, there's like some points we can mention later, but there is like a certain instant gratification to a lot of what's happening with the Panopticon, and like how people want to be fixed, and even this like how people want to quickly understand each other, which the constellation kind of plays into a bit. And then obviously also like the sharing of memories and like seeing through each other's eyes is like a cheat code basically in getting to know someone. And I can understand the appeal of something like that, almost that like forced but also accepted vulnerability between everyone, because if we're all doing it, then we're all doing it and it's fine, right, type of mentality. But there is something very like cheap about it because it is so instant and you're not really like working towards anything, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective, because really the appeal is you are getting the deepest understanding of the people you are connecting with that is currently possible. But yeah, by not having done any of the work for it, like not earning it, is it the same? And I think there's a lot of parallels and direct references to drugs, but a lot of parallels with this and drugs. And it almost has that feeling of like, yeah, like instant gratification of like, I can get this right away, but like, how do I get more of that feeling? Because if you can just like exhaust it, right? Like with the people around you, if I can connect directly with your brain and get this full understanding of you right away, what more is there? Like, what more do we have now?
Yeah.
So we were introduced to the constellation idea when Moremi is a kid still, when she's about to get the pulse. And so I was thinking about it in the context of kids and how, there's plenty of things that light up that are designed for kids. And it seems like the goal here is to get this installed in children as quickly as possible. So I wonder if it also came from an appeal angle of like, it's flashy, it's cool, and you can see other people have it pretty quickly, so it makes you want to be in the in group, which there's a lot of social pressure about in those early parts too. Like everyone else has one, like I've lost all my connection with everyone who has one now, so it almost felt like light up Skechers to me, of like, oh, you see someone else has them, it's like I want one of those.
Yeah, that is important to talk about, I think, like that societal pressure that she's feeling. Because I don't know how much we're going to get into it within this book, but it does kind of feel a bit like assimilating. Like she so badly wants to fit into what society has going on, which is obviously the pulse and everything like that. And it becomes so norm, and she's kind of like casting off what her mother almost wanted for her. And there was a quote in the book, I can't remember exactly what it said, but like her waking up kind of for the first time with the pulse or something about waking up. She mentions like that new experience feeling like forgetting or letting go of like her mother tongue or something like that. So I think there's like a lot of connection between just like assimilating into the quote unquote standard culture, which she's kind of had to do in multiple different ways because she's Nigerian.
Yeah, I do think just like a great deal of this book really is, maybe by no surprise, about individuality versus collective, group mindset, because that's what's being given up there, right? I think that's what's being implied, is like handing off what makes me a unique individual in society, and joining the greater group. It's part of what frustrates me a lot about what happens towards the end of this half, and like the idea that I guess we can get into now of total adoption. Like it's an active sacrifice to choose to be pulsed, I guess, right? Like you're deciding, okay, I never want to live my life the way that I've been living it, for most people in my whole childhood. Like I'm giving that up for good to join what everyone else is doing, and they don't mention a way of reversing it. I don't think that's really an option. They say it's very risky to remove your own. No surprise, it's connected to your brain, so they really don't want you to, of course, and I just don't even think it's an option to get it out once it's in. It's like a full-on, like, life-changing commitment.
Yeah, I think it's brought up a lot, that idea of being alone, mostly with like Moremi, and like she never wants to feel alone, and like her need to be loved and all that kind of nonsense we'll talk about, blah blah blah. But like the pulse is supposed to be kind of like the cure to that loneliness, and that's supposed to be a positive, but like and that sounds good, right? Like who wants to be alone, all of that kind of stuff. But there is kind of worth in having time to yourself and just being by yourself.
Yeah, it just, especially as early as the kids are getting it too, like they really aren't becoming an individual
Yeah,
before it
yeah.
happens. They don't become unique people. They haven't had the chance yet to really develop their own thoughts and stuff. So, and I kind of think they want it to be that way, right? Like when you go into the Panopticon the first time, it's giving you a lot of information and trying to learn your interests. And I think we kind of see this problem with social media now, of what that ends up doing is just reinforcing a certain sub part of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and saying like, this is what we think you are, so we're going to keep feeding that to you, and then maybe you'll actually drift and become more like that, because you're kind of in the echo chamber, if you will, of like what are the things that were picked up on by this algorithm, in this case the Panopticon. That's all that you're going to be fed now.
Yeah. Oh man, echo chambers has never been more relevant than this like past couple weeks in my life. But yeah, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's like contradictory, right? Because the pulse is supposed to expand your perspective. You see everything, but it is an echo chamber if it's learning what you want to see. Like there's a certain amount of active choice you need to make to drift from that chamber, and I don't think people in this socioeconomic climate we have in this book are going to drift to anything they're not comfortable with, right? Like, because that's
Exactly.
kind of the point, is to be comfortable, to be docile, and to be watched.
Yeah. Only other things I wanted to bring up with the pulse is just like how they gained its popularity, I suppose. Like one thing they mention is that it's known to prevent dementia, which makes sense because they're like actively storing people's memories, like it's data in a hard drive. And then the other is that they claim it reduces crime and like helps make people feel safer. They make a reference to like, oh, people can walk down alleyways and not have to think about it because like there's eyes on everything. Not to mention like the drones flying around everywhere. Though also that's not true, because we definitely see casual crime happen in this book. So
Right, yeah.
that's at least a reason they give for it.
Yeah. And Moremi even mentions when she goes to her old house, like, it's in a neighborhood that isn't patrolled by the police very often. So it's like there's still kind of like that divide between community, and like people can turn off and go dark if they want to. So it's helping certain people. It's helping the right people, quote unquote right people,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not actually entirely as helpful as they're making it seem.
In some ways, I was shocked by that because they have this drone army. I'm shocked that they wouldn't just be all over the darn place.
Yeah.
Honestly, seems like this is their opportunity to have full surveillance power over the people. So
Yeah, but it depends on like what people they're trying to keep safe and like uplift.
mm-hmm.
It's possible they don't care if the poor people are a danger or are in danger because they're considered worthless, kind of.
Right.
But that's me making assumptions on how this place is run.
I think it matters. I have some thoughts about that when we get to the flood later on.
Yeah.
So with Moremi, I wanted to start off talking about kind of the full family, not just Moremi. First, probably main character for Moremi is her mother, who, as she was growing up, taught Moremi to dance, which she would later pursue to hopefully be her career. One early scene that they have together that stuck with me is that she kind of nostalgically looks back at dance lessons from her mother, where her mom like would give her feedback for improvement, whether criticism or negative feedback, whatever you want to call it. And afterwards, Moremi would like self-harm to punish herself about it, even though like we don't see that sort of behavior from the mom. Like all we get described from the mom is she gave me criticism. We don't see like if she's been conditioned that way by her mom or if that kind of came from somewhere else.
Yeah. These kind of relationships always give me a little bit of pause because it gets expanded upon later, but the mom was almost a dancer, right? Like that was her
Right.
dream, and now it's Moremi who's supposed to be living that dream for her, basically. And just kind of that parental pressure made me nervous about what the criticism might be like, or like what kind of pressure she might be under, and just I don't know. Like you said, we haven't gotten anything exceedingly detrimental, but I'm still like a little nervous.
Moremi obviously has a lot of strong feelings about her mother of a wide variety, I would say, and I think that informs so much of what she goes through once her mom presumably has passed away, and like her traumatic response to that. But it's hard to say, like, yeah, like where is it coming from? Like, is it, or at least where is this like need to please coming from? And does she? I mean, it seems she doesn't come to enjoy dance herself, but like, is it really all just to do with her mom? Like, I don't know. There's just like so many things that don't get explained as far as where did that come from, and I think it's hard to see that and say, okay, she taught herself to do that. Like, I had to come from, at least in my head, it had to come from somewhere else. The self harm behavior, and I think the easy assumption would be her mom like did that to her first, right? Like maybe there was like a physical punishment when she didn't do well as a younger kid, and then she later learned to kind of behave behave that way herself. But there's so many things about her childhood we don't know, and like influences she could have had, and we know so little about her father. Like there's too much in the air.
Yeah, I will say there is like one relationship we get told about which could kind of feed into this behavior, which is the aunt, right? The mom's sister it was actually giving If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, to be honest. Because
Yeah,
that had
that's a
the
good
aunt
point.
figure as well. And the aunt was clearly depressed and would attempt to take her own life multiple times, eventually did. And Moremi was the one who found her like that, right? And
Yeah.
although I don't know if she was still alive at that point. I can't remember. But still, that's like very traumatic to see, and like the idea of depression kind of being in their family would make sense for how Moremi is feeling. I mean, she has plenty of traumatic events that happened to her throughout her life, but like considering the dreams don't fix everything for her, it would make sense if depression was just something she carried genetically, right?
That makes sense, especially with like the reference to cutting and stuff.
Yeah, so it would make sense if like maybe the aunt was the reason why she was taking these actions, basically.
Right, the physical actions, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too.
And it's also like the first bit we see of like how this society is kind of failing, because she just kind of has to live with seeing that, and I guess we just don't give people therapy here.
Crazy, I know. There's a lot to be said about how rich this world seems, right? Like how rich particularly like I guess this country and some of the people in it seem, and like it just reflects society, I suppose. But like how little is done with that to like not even have basic thoughts of like what about just like good old fashioned therapy,
Yeah.
There's a lot missing.
Yeah.
Other characters in Moremi's life, at least for part of it, was her father, who left the family when she was somewhat young. I can't remember. It sounded like she was elementary school or something like that, but Halima was a teenager. And that forced their mom to take multiple jobs. It sounds like that was probably a pretty big barrier in her not being able to dance. Did they say if she was a dancer before that happened, like professionally?
Well, I know they met in college, and I think the mom was 19 when she got married, because it was kind of like a whirlwind, super quick thing. And Moremi is like, well, if they did it, then clearly I should do it.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm assuming she was dancing at that time. So yeah, it's possible she gave it up either because of the marriage or maybe because she got pregnant or
Yeah.
that kind of situation. Classic,
Right.
you know?
And then she goes on to call her kids a mistake.
Oof. Crazy.
Of course, there's the sisters. I mentioned Halima, who's the older sister, and Ziba, who's the younger sister. And we'll hear more about them as we get into this. But I think we can frame them a little bit more once we get the context that this major flood happens. The Thames barrier is actively bombed in a terrorist attack, and it causes this massive flood across what they refer to as the floodplain of London. I have to say my geography of London is like next to none. I have no idea what that refers to physically. I'm sure plenty of people could inform, but and it kills so many people. I think they refer to something like almost 1 million people.
Was it that many?
Yeah, at least later on they
God.
reference. I don't know if that was meant to be taken as a sign of scale or literally, but yeah, like a crazy amount. And I think maybe some of the implication too is like right now the Thames barrier is like it's not always active, like it's movable. And it's only for like when waters are like significantly higher than average to prevent flooding. I wouldn't be shocked if like some of the implication here is that 25 years down the line, it's not so optional anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we do get a lot of mention of like the environment kind of being a disaster. So,
but yeah, so their mom goes missing, and they're later told is dead because of this flood. I mean, Ziba and Moremi were pretty darn close themselves too.
yeah, Moremi actually almost died.
Yeah,
Ziba had to like basically pick her up out of the wave, but it got really close for them.
and the way they escaped, I was like, they are both lucky. Like they were just like, we're gonna start climbing this wall. I was like, that's so shocking that worked.
Yeah.
But a few interesting things happen here, both with and without the sisters. But one is that the pulse shuts down for a bit, like immediately afterwards. They can't really communicate with each other. I was trying to find some reasoning for this, like whether or not it was because Panopticon infrastructure was affected or because there was an active choice to like shut people's communication down in like as far as like buzz around what just happened and like people like starting to spread information or misinformation or information they just don't want you to know about the attack.
Yeah, I didn't really think about the second option. I really just thought it was like because of the flood being mentioned before by another character, I kind of just thought it was part of the terrorist act in which I feel like the flood was supposed to take down the Panopticon. Like that was the hope, that was the goal, and it was kind of a failure or it was a test run. I'm not really sure.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess I didn't even think of that. That makes a lot of sense, especially with the character we'll get to soon, Orpheus's dad, mentioning the flood ahead of time and being like, we just need to wait till then. Like, it would make sense if like his vision was that the Panopticon would cease to exist and kind of free up society for them a little bit.
Yeah. Or at least like disrupt it enough that they could actively like do something about everything happening. Because I do think like the point of civilian chatter being reduced, it does make sense because there's probably a lot of people trying to contact each other and blah 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 blah. But there's also like a level of that for the people in charge, right? Like, so it would make sense if they took out communications for those people if they wanted to make an actual attack.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. I mean, it seems like most of the folks on that side maybe don't have pulses or use them if they do, but I was like, maybe it's also to shut down their communication to be able to do something more, or any sort of second steps that were supposed to happen. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think for me, when I heard that part of it, of the pulse being shut down, the initial reaction was like, oh, this is terrorism related to like the Revelators, like someone who's trying to shut things down. But once they shut down the pulse, I was like, oh, but now I suspect the Panopticon folks a little bit, because if they are trying to shut down chatter and they don't want people to like start making theories about who did it, like it would allow them to control the narrative of who did this. It gives them time to put together like their or send out the communication that they want to send out. Once everyone has like chilled out, because maybe they wouldn't be able to do that right away, or if they did it too fast, it'd be suspicious. So it gives them the time to be like, okay, when we come back online, when people are looking for answers most, we're going to feed them the answer we want.
Yeah, and I definitely think that manipulation is possible, considering what they do later with like the singularity. Manipulation is not outside of their wheelhouse. Like I could see them doing something like that, so people feel that grief that some of the characters feel of like the pulse being gone, and then also feel that relief when it's finally returned to them, so that they feel thankful, right, for the Panopticon.
Yeah, taking advantage of a situation like this to be like, this is the solution. Like, let me create a problem. Like Ziva says, let me create a problem and then solve it for you.
Yeah.
Sell you the snake oil.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting to see people like experience withdrawal once the pulse goes down too. Like Moremi definitely experiences it of like, I feel like lost without this connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of those things that does really mirror current society of like, I think you see people going through like, I'm gonna like go through a social media cleanse, or like, you know, go off of this for some time. I mean, some people do it for like boycott reasons too, but I'm thinking more of like on the mental health side of like pulling out of social media because of like this behavior, this relationship that we have with it.
It truly is, I don't want to say one of the worst things to happen to us, because that's not exactly true, but there is something to the idea of being plugged in all the time and like doom scrolling, and like there are so many negatives and we just haven't pinned them down exactly as we need to yet, because we're still kind of trying to figure it all out, and because people are so like obsessed and like addicted to it, right? They don't want to have like the negatives be brought up.
Yeah. It's interesting because, you know, we just went through like the TikTok potential shutdown situation, and like there, you know, there's many reasons aside from like attachment to TikTok that's complicated. But I'm thinking about that of like, man, like I think a lot of people are gonna go through it if that's stuck.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of like I don't know what to do without this now.
Yeah, like I think there's some positives about it, right? Like people do use it as a job, and that is devastating if you're losing your employment. But I saw a post about it that was like, how am I going to like plan dates and figure out how to do this and this and this without TikTok? And like the quote retweet was just like, you guys are so useless. Like, because like it's also the matter of like Chat GPT we see all the time, right? People using it for like grocery lists and like all this other nonsense, and it's like people really cannot do anything for yourself. Like, and it's fun now to like say those things and kind of like make fun of people like that, but it's like we really are falling behind in like developing and being critical and like making decisions and just researching and all that kind of stuff. We're just losing it. We're losing it.
We're becoming over dependent. I guess that's what the book is trying to tell us a little bit. We're becoming over dependent. That's true. And like you know, my day job, I work with AI things, and I always tell people like my job is to stop people from using AI to make a recipe. You know, like it's like we have to like calm this shit down, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Like it's not meant to you know, artists have already been saying this. It's not meant to replace the parts of us that are human. Like it's too costly for that. First of all, like it's got such a, you know, we know about its environmental impact, but it's just not like the part of ourselves that we should be giving up.
Yeah, and people are like in the book, people are very all or nothing with it. Like, oh, you know, you have to hate all of AI, or this AI is good though. So like people who hate generative AI are idiots. Like people are just doing 100% of everything.
Yes.
And that comes up, I think, in this book when like Moremi is trying to talk about the positives of technology. Like she's 100%ing everything. And it's like there's more than this. Like there's some black and white that shouldn't be here, you know?
For sure. We referred to this a little bit too already of like the sort of class dynamic in the book, and it really emphasizes that a ton of poor folks died in the flood because of where it happened. This is where I think that discussion of like who is responsible for it becomes a little bit more important, because I'm having trouble, especially with Ziba's kind of angle and explanation of the Revelator angle of things, believing that group would be willing to sacrifice a great deal of the poor population for their purpose, even though it seems like the book is pointing at them being the ones to do it. That would be shocking to me, but I think it's possible. Whereas like with the Panopticon, I really think that'd be super, like, that'd be nothing to them, honestly, right?
So you think the flood itself was caused by the Panopticon?
That's what I'm getting at. It's like I think there's a good chance that they caused it. That's what I was getting at too, with like of having control of the situation and causing the problem and solving it. Like I think it is very possible that this was caused kind of surreptitiously by them. Like maybe not even to the government's knowledge, at least at that time.
Yeah, I mean, the data is just vague enough that something else might be going on.
It seems like he worked with the Panopticon before becoming a fugitive, so it's possible that his angle on this was not the flood that's going to happen because of the people I know as a revelator, but rather the flood that I know is going to happen from my time working at the Panopticon.
Yeah, because then, because if you think about what the flood does, right, it kills some poor people that don't matter. So the Panopticon would have you believe. And it kind of reinforces that reliance on the pulse, because who's not found? It's the people who don't have a pulse and can't be found, which kind of just enforces the idea of total adoption, because
you just wiped out a great deal of people who were against it, probably.
Yeah, because that's kind of like Moremi's whole... I can't remember if it's her or Halima when they're talking to Ziba. It's like, if Mom only had a pulse, we would have been able to find her.
Yeah, that's Halima, yeah.
Yeah. Which is like such a good way to make this bad thing seem good. It's like, it's tracking you 100% of the time, but if a disaster happens, we'll be able to find you, right? And so you're like, oh, well, surely that's good then, which is crazy. But like, that's what the Panopticon could have you believe, especially if you're like in those poorer districts and you're kind of grasping at any help you can get, and the Panopticon seems to be helping you, because it's definitely not helping you in any other way, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
This at least seems like a positive.
Yeah, it's that particular comment from Halima that like made me double down on the Panopticon thing a little bit, because I mean, I'm making a few assumptions with this angle, but at least basing it on their mom, like, I would get the sense that probably poor folks don't adopt the pulse as quickly as not poor folks. And so to me, taking out a large amount of poor folks is probably taking out a lot of folks who don't have one at all. And then they can kind of use this like, well, they don't have a pulse, so it's hard to find them situation to not care about it. The only thing against that is what we were talking about earlier of like, they're not really surveilling them that much. And like, I don't know, I feel like if they actually did want to eliminate a lot of those folks, they probably could find other ways to do it that didn't take out a quarter of London or whatever. But it's at least that comment made me increase skepticism further with them.
Right. But also it's you could also note how, like, if they're not patrolling poorer areas and there's crime happening in those areas, then that just reinforces the idea that you need a pulse to be safe, right?
True.
You made a good point about this flood. I didn't think about it so deeply.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to me that we don't really figure out who it is. But that being said, I do think they refer to having imprisoned a few folks for it. They just don't say who those people are or what their motivations were.
Yeah.
And also, like, they could just be sacrifices, if you will. If the Panopticon did it, they could probably be they also have their own police force, right? So they could be like, oh, we found the guys. These are the ones who did it. And it's just like some random people, you know?
And they're not, to our knowledge, they're not like interviewed or like held to trial. They're just they're put to sleep, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Which is possibly torture for eternity, but we're not 100% sure yet. But
yeah, I mean, right, exactly. It sounded at first like, oh, like they just dream for all that time. That's, you know, I guess there's worse punishments, but then they talk about like them being stuck in their own labyrinths, and then it suddenly sounds a lot more horrible. Yeah, especially too because of the time stretching aspect. I wanted to dive into Ziba just a little bit more because she is like the closest angle we get for the Revelators, given that Orpheus's dad dies pretty much immediately. When she gets injured in the whole interaction with the cops and everything, she expresses a lot of skepticism to include, like, actually I don't even remember if it was in this moment, but at some point she includes like modern medicine as like a reference of skepticism. And it made me a little bit concerned of like, is her angle or the Revelator's angle, or even worse, the book's angle, going to be a little anti-vaxxy? And like they mentioned it earlier in the book, of people who don't get a pulse are seen as kind of like anti-vaxxers in the negative light. Or on the other hand, like if Ziba is supposed to be like a villainized character because of association with terrorism, and like the book is actually gonna go like super pro techie, or like, you know, ideally the book is just gonna be nuanced about it, but like I have concerns in both directions, specifically because of Ziva's character.
I actually don't remember her saying anything like that, so I'm just gonna take your word for it.
Okay.
I know Moremi brings up modern medicine a lot to kind of make all technology seem good.
Yeah, I think it was more of like a why aren't we doing this or why aren't we doing that if we have this technology?
Oh, like it should be more useful in different ways?
Yeah, like they're focusing on specific things. She didn't get as far as implying this, but like I would think an example is like we've solved dementia because we focused on memory, but are we actually caring about solving modern medicine problems, or are we just doing things that are convenient for our goals?
I
That
see, I
that's
see.
I'm putting words in her mouth for sure there, but like that was kind of my takeaway.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that is more like a jab at maybe the integrity of the Panopticon. Like, do they actually care about people? Do they care about curing dementia? Or is it just good PR that it happened type of situation? Which I think could make sense for her character. Because I don't think I've gotten the vibe that it's going to be like super pro tech within this book.
Mm-hmm.
I think the author has just done a good job of establishing that our main characters are kind of toxic and they're not healthy individuals. So like anything they think about the Panopticon, especially Moremi, is like it's not how a person should be living in the world, right? Like and the way Orpheus kind of thinks back to his childhood when he didn't have the pulse is like there's something almost very beautiful about that entire imagery. And it's something he still carries with him. He kind of like makes that island again in his dreams, right? So like yeah, I just feel like it'll probably be nuanced, I guess is the simplest way to say it. But
I think you're right. I think it's interesting because our main characters are flawed, really, right? They're so actively flawed and they're so known to be flawed in ways that like I think are a higher importance compared to those same things with main characters in other books. Like I guess Moremi is kind of a protagonist, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Like you are looking for her to grow, but you're not necessarily confident she will, you know?
mm-hmm.
So yeah, I get that. I'm hoping it does go down the sort of nuanced route. And it's not that I want like Moremi to be villainized for her thoughts either, but it's like, yeah, like I don't know if she's ever going to get to the point where she realizes the complexity of what's going on here when like she's kind of on one side of the, I don't know, one side of the fence and Zeba's on the other side. And that being said too, like there's potentially things that Ziva's going to be down for that I'm not down for, especially like if it comes out that she is associated with what happens later in the book. I might be like, you know.
Mm-hmm. To be fair, I have a feeling she might be.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, but yeah, I think the fact that this book is a tragedy, both because it's already kind of been mentioned in the book, but also because it's supposed to be like Orpheus and Eurydice, like I'm not expecting like necessarily full character arcs, I guess.
Mm.
Or like even for these to be good people.
I think there's a chance for them, but we'll see.
Yeah.
It's also interesting since you brought up the whole Orpheus Eurydice thing. Why is one character named Orpheus and one not named Eurydice?
To be fair, I think Orpheus is named Orpheus because he's named after Orpheus.
Right. I just thought that was an interesting choice. Like when she was named Moremi, I was like, okay, so like maybe this is the Eurydice character. I wonder what the Orpheus character will be called.
Yeah.
So, interesting choice.
Yeah. I mean, because Orpheus and Eurydice is mentioned in this book, right?
Yeah.
Like, it exists within the universe, so that's why it's not like a reimagining. It's just kind of like it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it would be too on the nose if Orpheus and Eurydice exist in Greek myth and in this book directly by name.
Yeah. And I think they're still, like, worried about that possibility of, like, their love being quick and then being a tragedy. They think about it. I think Moremi even compares themselves to Orpheus and Eurydice, but...
Though she seems to miss out on the snake bite part.
Yeah.
She's like really worried about Orpheus, being decapitated, but...
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to do that, if they're going to do it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Moremi's not supposed to compare herself to Eurydice, to be fair. Because she's kind of, like, blindly optimistic that they'll work out.
That'll work this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of a big thing for Moremi is she's in her adulthood, she shows up to this dance audition and does like pretty darn well at first, but then they ask for the audition to continue with The Pulse is Dark, and she pretty much immediately has like a full anxiety attack afterwards, so she's unable to finish it. And I think this is the main thing that informs her decision to later on pursue this quote therapy through the Panopticon, and one that Orpheus is associated with. So, you know, Halima and Moremi's old childhood friends and are connecting her with this program, so that way she can have some of her bad memories rewritten as a good dream, a good version of those bad memories. And this is apparently working with like 96% of people, where they like do this and then they like aren't depressed anymore, or at least something like it. They're reformed in some way for the better. And Moremi, as a pulse truther, has decided that this is good for her, and she decides to go through with it.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this, but I don't know if we need to talk about it yet.
We can talk about it more as a function with Orpheus as well.
Yeah, because I think it also matters for Orpheus's character in regards to like what he does, and he also kind of gets lost in like dreams and memories and stuff like that. So
for sure, yeah. All right, well we'll pause Moremi's story where we are now and get into Orpheus. So Orpheus's background: he is raised by his father Moremi on this island, like slightly off the shore, totally separated from society, also pulseless, you know, very much not interacting with people. His father is like training him in all sorts of skills. He does learn how to code, so it's not like so Luddite that they're not using technology. But then he also learns some skills that other people wouldn't bother to learn in the rest of society, like how to speak multiple languages. So he's definitely having a very like unique childhood, one that a Panopticon informed society would refer to as child abuse, apparently. But a totally different background for where they end up later on.
yeah, to be fair, I don't necessarily think this is the most healthy upbringing either.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd full on say abuse, but like he's kind of locked on this island, right? Like he can't even like talk to other people or leave, or like he leaves a little bit with his dad, but like he has no real agency, and he gets like in trouble. Like the reason they get in trouble to begin with is because he's like spying on like the regular people, right? The idea of this seems nice, but it is very distant from like humanity, which I think makes sense for like an Orpheus character not really understanding humanity, because Orpheus wasn't human, right? So
yeah, that's a good point. I think, yeah, it's abuse feels like it's strong to me, because I'm like, I feel like someone could just grow up in kind of a middle of nowhere rural place and have this experience and still be kind of within greater society. At least that person would probably interact with more than just their father, but I guess it just doesn't feel far from something that is possible.
Yeah. I think the weird parts come in when they like train how to like escape and like have those kinds of plans. That's where I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know about this.
Yeah, there is the aspect that they're fugitives. So, and I guess in the government's eyes, it's like if you've kind of forced your kid to be a fugitive, you know, that's I get why they're calling it that. It's just the fact that the society itself is maybe a little messed up for that, you know.
Yeah.
So the whole reason for those escape plans is that at some point in time, Moremi wants them to, you know, escape out of here, ideally after the flood, but really just whenever they get found, and to escape to Silo 6, which the silos are associated with the Revelators. One question I had about this is like, why not just go now? Like, did you get a sense of like why it is that they were sticking it out on this island if there was already a place he knew he was going to go to that would take them in?
I thought it might be because if they went to the silo, they would have to actively participate in not necessarily terrorism, but like actions that might be deemed as terrorism. And maybe he didn't want Orpheus to kind of be involved in that life yet.
Yeah, like as a young kid especially.
Yeah, and I also think it's because like for some reason Orpheus's parents had like a very specific goal for him in regards to like defeating death or something like that. I don't really know. That's kind of a weird bit that happened in the book, but there's something about Orpheus himself that is special for some reason. So I just thought it was kind of a keeping him protected type of situation.
That makes me think, was this kind of an experiment for them, like the Revelators, to have kind of train Orpheus up in a certain way with certain skills to become what they wanted him to become? Because I see nothing about this world that's magical per se, to say like this guy is divinely ordained to do something, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Even though maybe there's a bit of reference to that with Orpheus not being a full human, like originally. I don't know. I like, to me, maybe it's like, okay, if we try to raise this kid this certain way and then like bring him in, like he'll be able to guide us somehow. But I just don't know what that would be and like how learning 8 languages would do that.
Yeah, there's like weird mentions of like prophecy in this book, right?
Yeah.
Like the dad, when he's speaking to one of the Panopticon people, there's like some kind of prophecy that's mentioned between them. And then later, Orpheus's friend, Sharif, mentions Orpheus being a part of some like bigger plan and like having some kind of role. So not necessarily like magic happening, but I don't know, like maybe some kind of belief. I don't want to say exactly religion, but like the way they carve into themselves and the way they kind of orchestrate makes me think a little bit religious.
They're described as a bit culty after a while, like with Sharif especially. Like he uses phrases like "I'm here to save you,"
Yeah,
and then when he looks at his memories, they talk about a baptism in the water. So maybe you're right. Maybe there is something that's kind of a mystical thing for that group of people that somehow Orpheus is a part of.
Yeah, I also think like the mysticism is like the hard opposite of technology, right?
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think either sides are right here. Like if the Revelators are kind of culty and like super religious, mystical, whatever, like I don't know if we'll reach the end of this book and say one side is 100% right.
I doubt it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of opposition would make sense for them.
Yeah, it kind of does the same thing that the Panopticon is doing on a larger scale too, to kind of predestine him. Right, to be like, you're going to be under our control and our influence, like to say to Orpheus, like you are like the part of this plan that needs to happen, when Orpheus has never been told what it is or understand what he could do or for what reason. Like that's, to me, it's like that's the same thing then.
Yeah, but they're probably operating by like statistics and data, or they say they are, probably.
Right. Yeah. Well, anyway, they try to escape when they get found, and Worsamy dies anyway. So, and never tells him what it is. He just continues to be a bit obscure about it. Orpheus gets shot in the hand, and then he's later found in the water. So, like, did they leave him there? Like at this part, I was a little confused about how A led to B.
I think they threw him into the ocean,
like thinking he was dead.
Or like
just
hoping he would
him.
die.
Okay,
yeah,
that makes sense. But yeah, he is found and not dead. So, and he becomes a bit of a he gets his 15 minutes in fame for it, because everything is recorded in this darn society by people's eyes. So his interactions of waking up and he's asking like, where did I go? Where did I go? That becomes like a whole, worldwide known thing. It seems even Moremi notices it and remembers it when she meets him.
I feel like that puts into words kind of what this whole society wants, like to figure out death. We get that from the Revelator side with the father wanting to defeat death, and then obviously we get it with the Magi and like the Panopticon wanting to defeat death, and like that connection between the labyrinth being in death and in sleep. So like, yeah, it seems like both sides are actually just wanting the same thing. So I don't know what that's about. But...
yeah, I have some thoughts about that for later on, but it is interesting because I think there's kind of two angles of targeting death. Yeah, especially with Worsamy being like, I think I've got it figured out, and then dying.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
and it does. This is kind of what incentivizes Orpheus to look into it independently too. Like he at home, as he grows up, he's diving into dreamland, I guess somewhat illegally, and trying to map out labyrinths, and he knows that there's a portal at the center of it because he supposedly saw it when he was in his near-death state.
Yeah, I wonder like how cerebral we're gonna get in this book, right? Because if we're talking about transcending humanity and like defeating death, is the solution to that to go through the portal and to become something else? Like, is that what we're doing here?
Be crazy if they figured that out with technology.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. It's like the portal. Well, that kind of changes my thoughts a little bit on maybe the theories I have later on, as far as like what is the underworld. We'll get to it, I guess. But
Yeah, we can talk about it because I don't know what that sentence means. How ominous. But
just as far as relating it back to the myth, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
What else about Orpheus? I guess before he gets to the point where he's doing all that, he grows up in a government-run home with Sharif, who you mentioned earlier. They start getting fed dreams by the Good People Project, which seems to be a maybe sort of a partnership between Panopticon and government to sort of reform kids who are from tough backgrounds, as well as like criminals is the other group that they use it on, to like encourage isn't even the right word, really like influence them to be different people, like have different memories. And like with Orpheus, they're like not rewriting over, that's still not right, but trying to influence him a way of thinking of his actual dad with like a dream dad. And also, like, most importantly, it's not consensual. Like, it's just happening.
Right, yeah.
The last thing I wanted to mention here is how Orpheus ends up working for the Panopticon, because I think this is kind of interesting as far as, like, you know, punishment for a crime, if you will, in that he gets in trouble for being in the illicit dream trade for a while, and then as, like, a way to get out of jail, he's told to go work for the Panopticon, making these dreams for ideally folks with PTSD. It seems to be the case most of the time, and he seems to enjoy that because he finds it to be a meaningful version of what he was doing. But yeah, now this is kind of, we're reaching the point where their two paths cross over, because Orpheus is going to make the dream that Moremi has that's supposed to heal her somehow. So we can get into the healing and the dream and the therapy of it all.
Yeah. I mean, first off, like, Orpheus experiencing all of these negative dreams from other people
that's too much.
Yeah, that's a lot to deal with. He might like it because of the labyrinth angle, like maybe he can dissect them and try and see inside them, kind of, but like, I'm like, damn, that must be an awful job, to be honest.
Yeah, I would think so. Maybe it's got some appeal to it the way the Singularity does, right? Of like understanding other people, right? I guess at like the empathy thing, but it seems like awfully too much for one person to bear.
Yeah. Though, to be fair, I wouldn't say he's bearing it necessarily well.
That's fair.
Considering what we know.
Yeah. He didn't start off in a good position for it, too.
Yeah. And he, like, hates being awake, right? Like...
Yeah, once you start using the word meat space, you know, things have gone wrong.
Yeah. So, such a weird phrase.
So with Moremi, like, doing this therapy thing, I guess I couldn't even understand, like, the groundwork for it, of, like, how this, like, having a positive dream about a thing you've had a negative experience of would do anything for you. And I think especially with PTSD, I don't see how that would work. I guess maybe because there's something a little unnatural about it. Like, it's not just a dream. It's not something your brain came up with. It's like they're messing with your brain a little.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see how anything could be that powerful, because it doesn't change reality. And they even have this conversation afterwards of like, this is reality. Like, you have to deal with reality now. I don't know how that would possibly have a long-term effect beyond just like a good feel. Like, what Moremi's reaction is exactly what I think everyone would be reacting, not 4% of people.
Yeah, to be fair, we don't know how long these tests have been going on for, so we don't really know, like, the long-term ramifications of them. But yeah, I think it's, like, it is kind of like a medication almost. Like, it's giving you kind of a bit of a high, so that when you wake up, you don't feel as bad, kind of like as a medication, and with that good feeling, you're supposed to change your life, right? It's kind of affecting the way you might react to certain things. Like, if you think of your mother, you don't just think of grief and break down. You think of the good memory you just had of her that kind of almost suffocates, like, like, lays on top of that feeling of grief. It's supposed to make it easier to bear, kind of, is how I imagine it happening.
Yeah. I'm just like, this trauma is a strong beast, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I also think how Moremi deals with it makes sense, and I think down the line it wouldn't surprise me if people started kind of losing the appeal of this, because my main issue with this is it's not first of all, it's not a cure for depression, And it's not even good therapy, right? Because you're not learning how to cope with
Yeah.
anything.
Oh gosh, that's like the big thing in this book, right? They don't learn how to cope. Like Moremi loses the pulse for 5 seconds and she can't handle it.
Right. Moremi is constantly hiding from things. Like, she doesn't want to see, she doesn't want to witness things within this book. And I think that's why these dreams don't work for her. But Zen, I think it's Zen, brings up, like, this is more effective because it's not like one flawed human talking to another flawed human, which is supposed to be a dig at, our therapy, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, but we're not just talking to a therapist, or you shouldn't be, really. Like, you're learning how to deal with how you're feeling. You're learning how to put certain things into words if you need to, or
Right.
like just kind of contextualize the things that are happening in your brain, so that when you break down, when you think you see a wave, you have coping mechanisms to deal with that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, a flawed human talking to a flawed human is me hanging out with my friends. Like,
Right.
It's not quite what therapy is. Yeah.
Yeah. But Moremi is just supposed to feel good because of this dream and want to change her life. But it's like, okay, there's a couple problems with this, right? Like the coping we just mentioned, but also she's poor. Like, how is she going to change her life?
Right.
There's no government aid. There is like nothing to help her or her family. They were literally evicted because of the flood. Like, they don't have enough, right? And the government isn't helping people, which is what Ziba mentions all the time.
It's just telling them like that they're good for nothings, right? Like, oh, like it's just got to do, like, just some people are just like this. Some people can't be, fixed. Like, some people, like, it's just because of them that they're not successful, because of them that they're not making money.
Right. It's the same nonsense we deal with now, right? Like, how many people would be quote unquote better? How many people would be fixed, quote unquote, if they just had money? And people like to throw around like money can't buy happiness, but we've come to the point in our lives where it's like, but it sure would help, right? It would help.
Yeah, we're not asking for happiness, really. We're talking too optimistically here. Like, we're talking about needs, like things that allow people to access, the rest of society, really.
So it's like, it's not a cure. It's just not, and it's not enough.
Yeah, and especially because she just comes out seeking it, like, because of the reaction she has. Like, I'm not surprised. What surprises me is that they ban her from getting it for 18 months because, and not because I think like the addiction response is bad per se, but because like, I get it as a preventative measure, but because this is the same people who implant dreams in people non-consensually. It's like, you're willing to just throw dreams at these people who didn't ask for them, didn't consent to them, might not even know that that's what you're doing to them. And you're willing to do that kind of as much as you would like. But this person who seeks it out and desires it, like, now you're saying, oh, well, now you can't have it. And I guess that comes back down to the whole, like, there's no bodily autonomy in this book, right? Like, the whole pulse thing is not letting people have bodily autonomy. They're like, we're trying to give everyone a pulse, whether or not they want it by this vote. And yeah, like, we're putting dreams in people's bodies, whether or not they ask for it. It's all in the same category of like, okay, well, we have control, not you.
Yeah. I think it's like also just establishing worth a little bit. Like, people who want to stay asleep, who like use Nox and all of that kind of stuff, are worth less societally.
Right.
So like Moremi having that kind of desire for it, and she's so primed to be hooked on Nox, to be honest, that like she's just not useful within the grand scheme of things. Orpheus is different, right? Orpheus is an artist in what he does. He has use that he brings to the Panopticon, but like other people, doesn't really matter. So it's like, good, you help 90% of people be normal people, but like the other people, it's like, who cares?
Right.
They're good test subjects, right? Like, it doesn't matter other than that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Nox, Orpheus goes through a Nox addiction of his own, kind of unintentionally. It seems like he's not doing it per se just because he's like, I'm about Nox, but he's like super invested in his labyrinth thing, and so it comes by nature of using it every day for that. So he's removed from work for a month.
It's also like another example of the lack of help, right? Because he's just told to go home for a month.
Go home and stop.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm supposed to just cold turkey this drug addiction.
Also, yeah, immediately, because they're like, we're going to check that you haven't used it in the past month. How long am I off for? 1 month. It's like, okay, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like it could just be screwed up so immediately. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then why would he stop at that point? If he screwed up once, why not continue? So definitely not good, not supportive. They clearly don't care though, because I'm sure Nox Addiction is selling them tons and tons of product.
Mm.
And it's during that time that Moremi, so desperately wanting to experience that dream just in a slightly different way, she says, that she seeks out Orpheus. She gets a tip, I don't remember from who, but a tip from a coworker maybe, about Lazarus, which is, as we already know from earlier in the book, Orpheus, but she doesn't know that. So she tracks him down at his home to ask him to make this version of the dream that she would like.
Yeah. To be clear, he's like not really about this. He's like it's not really going to help you.
Right.
If anything, it might make it worse.
Right. He's like they're telling you not to do this for a reason.
Yeah.
Which I think is fair.
Yeah, but she's like desperate and he's going through withdrawal. So
yeah, it's not a good moment for them. Like, and then Orpheus is so weird about it, in my opinion, at least, where he's like, well, like, you're a dancer. I guess you could dance for me, and then I'll decide. Like, this seems to just happen on the street. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she just, like, does this whole ballet thing, doubtfully with any sort of ballet shoe or anything, too. So she just goes for it. And he's like, well, I'm in love, so I guess I have to do it. And it's, I think, a very quick escalation.
Yeah, I think, like, that's why the rant scene was so necessary earlier, because that's kind of the start of like his feelings for her a little bit. Like, he thinks she's admirable, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then her coming back and like there's this, I can't remember if this happens before or after the dance, but Moremi is like, you have to fight for the things you want.
Yeah.
And I want all of these things.
Yeah.
By the way, most of them are like impossible. And like I can understand, I guess, his interest in her.
Yeah. It's not unexplained, for sure.
Yeah. And he probably does actually want to help. Or at least, like, show her that it's not going to help.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's up his alley of interest, too, of, like, going into the dream space at will. Even if he's not really engaged in the illicit trade for the most part anymore, like, he's like, but this is the thing I love, and I'm being deprived of it right now.
Yeah. Oh, it is also important to note, we see it, like, the other way, but, like, Orpheus has seen her memories, right? Like,
yeah.
That's something that's happened. And when she sees his, he mentions, like, inversion syndrome, right? And why you feel like you're in love.
Yeah.
So I could also see him having a bit of that because of the work he does. So she showed up just at the right time, I guess, where he's still feeling the effects of having been in her memory.
Yeah, this is interesting because, especially for all of the sex that they're about to have, but like it's I think this is parallel of a real thing that some people, especially like I guess younger folks, do, of like if they hook up with someone and they're like suddenly in love with that person, or like they can't stop thinking about that person because like that is a new feeling for them and like a sort of closeness and intimacy they haven't experienced before. I feel like it's kind of the same idea.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of like the suspension bridge effect. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Oh, I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you go through a terrifying situation with somebody, you might mistake some of those feelings as love.
Yeah, like people who experience trauma together, like getting married and stuff. Yeah, like survivors of something. Yeah.
Crazy. I'm like not judging this so
shocked.
harshly.
I fully, I can't believe, but I hear your reasoning.
Yeah,
it still feels really fast.
It's
either
very
way,
fast,
because then they go on and get married, right? Like it's like one thing to like be like, oh, like I think I'm like in love with this person really quickly, like I'm having feelings I can't explain. Though that really bothered. They're like, I'm having a feeling I can't explain. It must be love. I'm like, we can take a step back on that, but whatever. They think they're in love and they get married so fast, and like the sisters are like, are you crazy? And she's like, I promise it's different this time, which it totally isn't.
Yeah.
It's just that's where it's too much, because I'm like, we have stepped back from the situation, we've put some conscious thought in it, including 28 days that we have to wait before we can get married, like, and they still go through with it. That's just it's just nuts.
Yeah, I think it's like an issue because Orpheus mentions like if they're feeling the syndrome, they need to separate, right?
Yeah,
like they need to not spend time together. But instead they spend every moment together.
Yeah, so the point where Halima's like, where have you been?
Yeah, so it's reinforcing that feeling they have for each other.
Mm-hmm.
that they should get married. And like, if this was a normal book, I would be like, I hate this. But we can understand that this is like a very toxic relationship and very not normal.
That's fair. That's fair. It's not being glorified. Okay, because I definitely wrote multiple notes around this part of the book, being like, I can't wait to hear what Taylor has to say.
Surprisingly, I'm okay.
Yeah,
with it.
well, and I'm glad because this was exciting to hear. Still, it's like, oh, like context really does matter, right? It's not just about like, oh, they're being gross, they're being like lovey-dovey. It's like, no, but like there's context to why they are doing this, and like there's the understanding that this is it's not preferred behavior from one of the people in it, at the least,
Yeah, they both just don't want to be alone, right? Which I think I mentioned earlier in the episode, but like this is when it's at its strongest. Like they want to be together forever. I think Moremi is at her most broken down within this section. Like just her even being nervous when Orpheus leaves their bed, or feeling alone when he's sleeping, right? Like she's attached. She's so attached and like needs him at this point, right? And it's like you can so clearly see the way she's falling down a very dark rabbit hole, I guess. And this is also when we start to get like the cannibalism and like all of that kind of nonsense.
Wild, yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it's good context for the relationships we don't see from Moremi, because like I said, I assume this is probably kind of what she was like, because she has some very extreme reactions to the previous breakup. Halima says too that she's kind of an all-in person when it comes to relationships, so to see her like this makes a lot of sense to me. I the comment I made was like, I don't know what's more intense, like getting married immediately or etching the man's name into your arm, because like both of those are like intense for very different reasons.
Insane.
Like it's scary. Like I understand her sister's concern for sure.
Yeah, I mean they still just like let her do it.
Yeah, well, they probably don't feel like they have that much control over her at that point, but
yeah.
This is where Moremi immediately has a premonition of Orpheus dying early. Like, he's going to be taken away from me. So, which I think is interesting because that doesn't align so much with myth, right? Like, the whole reason he dies is because he can't get to her, really. I guess can't save her from the underworld. And that's because she's already dead. So I'm like, is Moremi... What is this? Is this going to be different?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, like, we've been lulled into like a false sense of what this book is, right? Like we're assuming Moremi is Eurydice, but we don't know that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's entirely possible she's one of the, I can't remember, are they naiads or they're like the river ones.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever creature was the one to like rip Orpheus apart, right? And like tear his head from his body. Like she could be one of those. She's not necessarily Eurydice.
Especially with the cannibalism comment.
Right.
Well, and I think that gets to like not a concrete theory I've had about this book, but like just an overarching one of like there's a lot of Eurydices in this book. Like I think Moremi is one for mentioning like I think I know how to cheat death. That kind of gave me Eurydice vibes. I guess maybe Orpheus is the one who has to do it in the original myth, but like to me that was like, oh, like he's like, I'm gonna come back. And then this is jumping the gun a little bit on the next conversation, but like Moremi's mom being seen alive. Like to me, like any character who's talking about coming back from death or doing so potentially, to me is like, that's why the story, I think the description says like based on the myth of Eurydice. Doesn't really say the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Like to me, like there's probably a lot of Eurydice action in the book that's not just Moremi, and maybe not her at all if you're right.
That's interesting.
Beyond the love, I guess.
Yeah, other than like the fast love, which makes sense, but also like Eurydice dies on her wedding day. Or like shortly after it, so we do get like the beginnings of framing for this book of like the narrator kind of saying, and we were happy for a short time.
Right.
Not in that POV, but like we're getting somebody reflecting back on the situation, right?
There was an interesting line I wish I'd written down that was like, oh, this is like foretelling. This one line is telling me that this book is going to go down.
Yeah. And there's mention of like Moremi, in one of Moremi's parts, it's like when people ask for their origin, she'll leave out all of this stuff.
That's what
but
it
she'll
is.
mention this night.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
So it makes me think like Moremi must be the one telling the story,
yeah,
right?
like she's alive and he's not.
Yeah, so Maybe I'm onto something with that Eurydice bit.
Yeah, I think you might be. That'd be super interesting if that's what the author did with this character, like lull you into it like this is Eurydice, but she's really not just Eurydice, you know? I like it.
Interesting. We'll see.
So kind of in the getting to the last section of what happens in this half, post marriage Orpheus returns to work at the Panopticon, and it's the same day as this symposium gala that's happening in the evening. And I guess the implication is this is some annual event, but tonight there's going to be some really big announcement that there's been some muttering about recently. Moremi is going with Orpheus. Halima has notably bowed out of this event.
Mm-hmm.
And while arriving to the event, Moremi sees her mom alive, happening, and being a little sneaky too. She kind of has to chase her down, for that matter.
Yeah, I think it's important that it's not just seeing her, but like they have a conversation. Well, they exchange words,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, limited, but yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think they also touch, right? They hold each other's hands.
Maybe that's what it was. Yeah, it's something. They are face to face, though. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's because it could always be a hallucination, right?
Yes,
like you always
yes,
have to
that's
think
true.
about that possibility, but this felt very real.
Especially because of what the interaction is. Maybe if like it was a super positive, lovey-dovey type of interaction, and then she kind of fizzled away, you know, then I'd be like, oh, maybe this is like some after effect of the dream. But it's a warning. She's like, get out of here. Like something bad is about to happen. Which boy was she right, you know? Also crazy of her to not get out of here. I guess she was like trying to look for Orpheus to get out of there, but I was like, you need to move faster. Like you need to be more intent
Yeah.
on what you're trying to do here. You're way too distracted for the warning you just got from your supposedly dead mother. So
I think it's also weird that like the mom is dragged away, right? Like by people in like hoods or something like that. Like the mom is taken out of the situation. She doesn't just leave like normally.
I didn't even realize that when I read that. For some reason, I thought she went like went off. You know?
No, I don't think it was like completely willing because I think she still wanted to talk to her daughter, but she was kind of pulled away. I don't know how like violently she was pulled away,
right.
but like I think she was pulled away and then like a speedboat took her off.
Mm-hmm.
And there were people around her, right? Like taking her away.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's probably because they were evacuating her, right? If she's associated with the Revelators, which is my thought here, like they're evacuating her because they're about to kick it off.
That's what I would assume. It's interesting that, I guess because Moremi has a pulse, she can't go with them, but like,
right.
It is interesting that she's just kind of left behind there.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions after that with Moremi's mom. I mean, I just wrote a list of them, and we don't have to answer any of them. But like, this is like the thoughts that were going through my mind. Like, if she's still alive and she's a Revelator, then was the flood just a way to get the Revelators out of mainstream society and into the silos? Like, was it a way to disappear people? If this was the Revelators who did it, disappear people and like kind of get them out in a believable way, so that way they weren't being tracked by the government at all. They were presumed dead, and so they could do their thing. That's one thought. The second is, why wouldn't she, even if that was the case, why wouldn't she maintain enough contact with her kids to warn them to stay clear of stuff like this, stay clear of the Panopticon, or like be more intense about raising the kids that way? Like she did eventually let the kids get a pulse, right? Like she shouldn't have if she really was going to go this route. So I have a lot of questions about like her care for the kids and like that comment of like Moremi's memory of her calling her a mistake. And then and yeah, I just like think she would want to warn the kids when attacks are going to happen no matter what. And then it's like, if she is associated with Revelators, and now we're presuming that it's from before the time the flood happened, did she expect her kids to die in the flood? So there's just like so many things that I don't think the reason I don't think we need to get into the answers for all these is we don't know enough about why her mom is alive, and if she's been alive the whole time or if she's been brought back from death to like know enough. But there's so many things that that brings up.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking like she was brought back from death because I feel like that's an important part of the book that hasn't been talked about a lot yet. Like we haven't seen many examples of it, I guess. So that's what I'm expecting her to be. But I could believe like she just needed to get out of the city.
Yeah.
But also contacting her daughters is kind of impossible with like 100%
like security
surveillance, right? Like and I don't entirely trust Moremi to keep it a secret.
Yeah, especially knowing where she goes with this. Yeah, like speaking out against it randomly on the street kind of thing.
Yeah, and the way she's interacted with like Zeba the entire time.
Yeah, I guess it's just if the mom was alive throughout that she could have had a bit more influence to prevent those sorts of things, I guess. But maybe it's the same vibe as Warsimi not really wanting Orpheus to know anything about his life.
Yeah.
If she is coming back from death, though, it makes me wonder what Warsimi was getting at. Like, I thought, or Warsimi was saying Orpheus is going to figure out how to bring them back. But clearly, if this is the case, they've got it figured out already. What do we need Orpheus for?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, if and it's especially thinking of the myth of like Orpheus being the one who tries to pull someone out from death. I don't know.
That's a good point. I think the simplest answer is like she just was a revelator and needed to get out of the city.
It makes me wonder too. Like, did they? I feel like they said they found a body. No,
I don't think so. Or, actually, I'm trying to think.
I know that
remember...
whatever it is happens distantly. Like, Halima reports back that X happened, like that we know that mom's dead.
To be fair, okay, there are multiple ways this could go, right? Like, either they didn't find a body and they just couldn't find her because of the pulse situation, which would make sense. Or they did find a body and then she got brought back somehow, which is fine. Or the other option is, I don't think any of the kids ever see the body, so it could just be a body, right?
Fair. There's definitely many potential explanations with something like that, with an event like that, so.
Yeah, and also we're talking about a flood, so you have to think about how that affects the body, right? Once it's dead. Yeah, the
condition. They talk about it a lot in those visions that Moremi has.
Yeah. So it would make sense if she was like unrecognizable if she had died and they had just scooped up a body and was like, this is close enough.
Right. Well, after this interaction, the sort of events of the night begin and the Magi of the Panopticon come out, which sounds like it's not out of a sci-fi book, but out of a fantasy book, and talk about the idea for the first version, at least, of the singularity or radical togetherness. They have their school of radical togetherness, so at least that. And there's a demonstration and everything, where they kind of ask doesn't even feel the right word. They send a push notification to all of the people who are there via their pulse, and are like, do you want to be a part of the demo? And they're like, yeah, sure, why not? And then they merge them all into one being, basically, right? Like they connect all of their minds together, and they kind of, the description of it is kind of like they've just experienced everyone else's lives all at once together.
Yeah.
Like, it's very, very deep with all of these people, 2,000 plus people, and it only lasts like 5 seconds.
Yeah, it's absolutely a manipulation. Like, from the push notification, which is crazy, and then also putting these 2,000 people together to feel this, like, togetherness, this love. Kind of a bliss. It's described as love. Yeah, and then ripping them apart. It's like, first of all, you don't know what impact that has on somebody's brain.
Yeah, that's what was my major concern, was like psychological effect.
Yeah, and then also, obviously, people are going to want to chase that feeling, right? Like, it's another drug.
Yeah, I know, that's exactly. It's like you just injected everyone with a little bit of heroin,
Yeah.
And all you said was, do you want to feel nice for a second? There's like no actual explanation of what they signed up for. Yeah, and I do think there could be really long-lasting psychological effects from doing something like this. It's crazy. The push notification was nuts. It was like, this is all we're going to say about it. But it was crazy, and this was just after, we do get a little sneak peek at the idea with Zen and Kimiko deciding to kind of become one being, Mercury, and like kind of the blissful feelings that they experience as a result, and like the deepness. And yeah, like, so now everyone has experienced it at a much larger scale, and they the Magi say, like, this is going to be an option for everyone, especially like if total adoption is taken on, which causes its own problems. Because I'm thinking, like, what we talked about with the beginning of the book of like social pressure to participate in the pulse and all that, like, sure, maybe total adoption doesn't mean everyone engages in the singularity, but it's going to effectively mean that, because based on the behavior everyone here has and like the blissful feeling they have, I think everyone's going to opt into that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be so strange to not be a part of it, right? Because you're talking to one person, but also talking to like 2 million people at the same time, world, right?
Or at least the country.
Like, there's that's just so, we just weren't meant to experience something like that. Like, being within that hive mind and also being outside of that hive mind. It's just not. It's not good.
It's giving Neon Genesis Evangelion when they you watched that, right?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Well, do you care if I say spoilery things about it?
No, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty old at this point, but basically at the end, like at least of the mainstream series of it, they all kind of just like meld into a being isn't the right word. Basically, like people call it soup. Like everyone turns into this juice, where everyone's mind exists all together at once, and there's no boundaries between anyone. Like everyone is just a being together. It's very trippy, very weird. The series ends very oddly. That's what this reminded me of just like everyone being one thing, and like eventually the main character kind of learns to separate himself out of it. But that seems to be the goal of this, is like everyone's just one big soup.
I mean, the Magi set it up as if they do this, then you would never die, right? Because the essence of you would exist in someone else eventually. Like,
Right,
it doesn't
right.
matter if your body dies.
They can be stored anywhere, right? Yeah, it's like cloud storage for the mind.
Right. Which, like, sounds fine. Well, first of all, I don't agree that we should live forever anyway, but that's, like, my own, personal opinion. Controversial, I know. But Mercury tries to set it up as... Also, Mercury being Hermes is very interesting. Kind of, like, foretelling this entire situation.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But, like, Mercury makes it seem so positive because you get to, like, entirely be with someone you love, and like you have multiple perspectives to kind of act on, and you're never alone, like all of that kind of stuff, which sounds good for the most part. But like, I mean, I said it at the beginning, there is worth in being alone sometimes, and you also just lose your agency, right? Because like, what is the situation here? If you disagree with the group, well, you're screwed. I don't know
there
what to
is
tell
no
you.
So
Yeah, and also you probably will never disagree with the group because you're all thinking like the same thoughts based on the same experiences. So like Mercury said like there is no loss, only gain, but like absolutely there's loss. Like there's just like no you anymore.
Yeah, this is the concern I expressed towards the beginning. It's like, yeah, like everyone is not an individual anymore, and I feel like that doesn't sustain itself, because how does someone new become a part of this and have something to contribute? Like I think you just stagnate society immediately, even if people continue to have kids somehow. I don't even know how that works at this point, but like you continue to have kids and raise them, and you immediately tack them onto the pulse. Remember what I said earlier, like those kids haven't had a chance to become an individual yet, really. They're all just going to contribute effectively the same thing as each other. So where is there any more beauty left then? I guess, are you just saying there's enough people in the world now that it's beautiful as it is and you don't need any more? To me, it's the end of humanity.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think that's the goal, right? Like you're transcending, you're becoming no longer human, something above human. They say like becoming godlike basically is what the Magi want. But like, yeah, I think part of this entire book is like what makes us human is the good stuff, right? Like the dancing and the artistry. And we see a little bit in like the rant of the protesters of like, what have we lost because of technology, right? What are we losing right now within the AI age, right? Like, you see bitches all the time complain about like, why can't we get another statue of David or like Sistine Chapel? And it's like, you don't pay your artists, like we don't respect art, right? But like everybody wants to be an artist, and that's kind of what Gen AI has become. But it's like there's no humanity in any of that.
Yeah, exactly. I have no more words to that. That's perfect.
Yeah, I ranted a little bit, but as you can see as a creative, I'm getting pissed off about all that Gen AI.
Exactly. And it's exactly what it does. It reduces everyone to the same behavior, right? Like, if everyone decides to use generative AI to make art, well, now art all just looks like generative AI art, which like we see, right? Like it's you can see the style, which I hate to use that word almost, but and like people, and you see people subjecting themselves to it, almost like, oh, like this is so cool, like this is exactly what I want. And it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. That's not what you want. So it's tough.
We've reached a point, and this book speaks on it, like that disconnect between which Moremi doesn't, I don't think, understands completely, but like sometimes there is just an excess of technologies. Like we don't need all of it. We don't need everything because we can create something. Like and I think that's the nuance that like we probably will get in this book, but like it was at least something I thought about when she's talking about science and like modern medicine and stuff like that. Like that stuff is good. I love that shit. But like the other stuff, this Panopticon stuff, we don't need it.
Yeah.
Right?
And it certainly is just, it doesn't need to be applied to everything, right? Like when I said the recipe thing earlier, right? It's like, if you're going to come up with something like this, it's just hard. How do you regulate shit? That's a whole other conversation. But it's like, what is it for then? Like, what are you using this for? It needs to be worth the juice. If we're going to be like, if we need to run a large language model for something, it better be darn good because it's going to produce all of these emissions if we do it, you know?
Yeah.
It's just not having that thought to be like, let's not throw a hammer, or let's not have a hammer and look for nails, right? Like, let's like be careful about how we're solving problems and be targeted, because the point of this isn't to throw it at art and music. It's to solve problems, and we're going way beyond that.
Yeah. But like it's just like part of capitalistic progress, right? Like you just create, or you don't even create, that's the wrong word to use in this context, but like you just innovate and like push forward and progress for the sake of progression. But like there is no end to that system, right? Like, so it just doesn't work. You lead to ruin, which is, you know, what we see with our environment and what we see within this book. It's collapse.
Yeah.
But
well, on that note,
that was very long-winded. Yeah. We'll probably talk about this all again in the second half, so I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get some new information for the next time.
Yeah.
So the very last thing that happens here is, of course, this event is the target of a terror attack, which was foretold moments ago, and they bomb the stage balcony ? Bertram is dead is what's important there as a result, and he was kind of, from what I understand, just kind of the money source of the Panopticon as opposed to being the brains. I think the other two are more the brains.
I think so. Yeah.
And then, the audience, too, is attacked. I mean, it makes some sense from, if it is the Revelators doing this, that they would target the people, too, because they're the people who are implementing a lot of the stuff that they want to stop. But it is, of course, a horrific event. You see, like, basically, it's like they firework the audience is kind of how I understood it. And then on top of that, they do hack the pulses in the area and send a painful auditory signal to everyone, which causes some pretty extreme reactions, and ones that Moremi is like, I would do that if I could too. So they kind of have to, like, Orpheus being, I think, pretty experienced with the pulse and rate things that are real and not real as a person who frequents the dreams. It's like, no, like, we can talk ourselves down from this because it's not real. It's not like an actual sound. It's a signal. This, like, for me, when I initially read, I held off on this comment earlier, but when I initially read about the pulses, this is exactly the sort of thing I thought would happen, because at least with this sort of devices similar to this today that we see, so I'm thinking the category of Internet of Things devices, so this would be things like a Google Home or like an Alexa speaker, smart lights, things like, anything that kind of has that internet technology in it that isn't a computer or computer-like device. Those tend to be pretty vulnerable devices from a security standpoint. Like they are a thing that makes a network more vulnerable because they're quite susceptible to hacking. And that's like kind of a known thing with Internet of Things devices. So that like really stuck out to me when the pulses were introduced. It's like, it's already probably a bad idea to connect a bunch of brains to the internet. But then to like do so in this way, like it feels like it is putting people up at this risk to be hacked and attacked in some way, or potentially even killed. So I'm not surprised at all that it happened. I was really just waiting for the moment.
Yeah, I'm assuming they did it over this small area, but like I would be interested to see if this is like the limit of what they can do, like if this was a test run of doing this kind of thing. Because I don't think we get mention of it happening before, so it must be,
that's true,
relatively new.
Unless they're the ones who are responsible for silencing the pulse those 2 days.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. And I wonder if this is also why Orpheus is so important, because he has such training in like more analog coding, but also he's become so proficient in the pulse, so like that might be a reason why he's so necessary for the revelator side of things.
Mm,
Like maybe he's able to do something that influences all of them at some point.
true. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say about this event other than like I guess they made their point and it seemed horrific, and that's where we left off.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll end here with any theories we want to solidify before getting into the second part of this book.
Yeah, to be fair, we've mentioned a lot of stuff throughout, but yeah, I think my main one was I had an idea of Orpheus being ripped apart, and Moremi maybe being the one to do
Mhm.
it. Um, I still thought she was probably Eurydice when I wrote that down in the notes, but now I'm thinking like it is probably likely she's not within everything happening, and then you added on the maybe multiple people are Eurydice,
Mhm.
which I think is a very interesting idea. So that's probably my biggest one, other than like the labyrinth stuff, which you also have.
Yeah, for me, like the cannibalism thought, it's so funny how that would it was almost a passing comment, but too jarring to be one, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that really makes me think you're onto something there. Yeah. So theories for me, one is also with the assumption of Moremi being the Eurydice character or a one Eurydice character, is thinking about relating it back to the myth where like Eurydice ends up dying or in the underworld, and needing or Orpheus wanting to, I should really say, extract her from there. My thought is that the closest thing to that here is the dream world, going into dreams with dream time, that sort of thing. So with Eurydice, with Moremi getting into the dream therapy thing, that she's going to want to keep going back to that. And so she'll eventually just like keep going into dream world or maybe even get stuck in the dream world, specifically probably in a labyrinth where then Orpheus, he's learning about the labyrinth map, so he's going to have to like go extract her and bring her back to consciousness, and presumably that would not be successful.
Yeah, I have two remarks to make on this because I have a similar thought. Like, I think Orpheus set himself up as a character who has like nothing to lose. So I think he's been very careful about mapping out the labyrinth, but it would make sense for Moremi, who is now something to lose, to kind of get stuck there and him having to kind of take a leap and enter the labyrinth, probably to some kind of success, but probably without
Mm-hmm.
her. So I feel like that would fit within his character and also the mythos happening here. The other thing is there's a lot of, should I say a lot? It might have just been me making these connections the entire time, but like death and sleep, I think I mentioned this in the last book too, Starling House. Death and sleep are like very connected,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they're twins, and they're always connected in literature and all of that kind of stuff and in mythology. So the fact that Orpheus saw the labyrinth in death and then you see it in sleep just makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And also within this book, one of the characters, I can't remember who, says there's also like mythos of when you sleep, you go to a different world, right? So like that attached to the labyrinth being attached to the underworld, I think is just a connection that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. So everything lines up
Yeah.
if we're following the myth, right? Like,
Yeah. The only thing that affects my thoughts on this now is when we talked about the portal at the center earlier, of like that. Maybe that's just like true death though, right? Or maybe that's the point of no return. Like maybe that's like where maybe Eurydice goes in there and never comes back. But what is the port? Is that really the underworld, or is, yeah, I don't know. Like is the labyrinth kind of the parallel, but then the reality is that's still death? I don't know.
I could see it being as like kind of a true death because you kind of cross the river Styx to get into the underworld. Like you're taking a journey to get to the other side,
Yeah.
kind of. So like the portal could be somewhat similar to that. And then also the idea of the underworld, like you drink from the Lethe to erase like your human memories and stuff and become a shade, and you kind of lose yourself entirely in that moment,
Right.
right? So like the portal could also be the next step of that underworld journey, kind of like the labyrinth is the first part, the journey part, and then the portal is the losing yourself, the true death
Mm.
part.
And a thought I'm having there too is maybe it isn't even like death, but like say she can just never come back to consciousness or something, like
Mm,
coma or something like that.
yeah, it also depends on what system of death we're working with. Like maybe this book has reincarnation, you know? Like, maybe once you get through the labyrinth and you go through the portal, you become the next iteration of yourself.
Maybe.
Like, maybe that is true death.
That's interesting, too.
But then that is getting into, like, mysticism,
Yeah.
right? So, I don't know.
I'm wondering, too, like, the part of the myth that's, like, Orpheus looking back and, like, kind of damning her to death in a way. Like, what the connection there could be. Because I'm having more trouble paralleling. Like, if she is Eurydice and like he's trying to get her out of there, like what would make it Orpheus's fault?
Yeah, and then also who is Hades, right?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I'm tempted to think someone at the Panopticon, but I don't know who. Maybe Orpheus's boss.
I mean, maybe. Yeah, I if he's set in there.
Yeah.
If like Eurydice or if Moremi is used as like a trap, right? Like she's sent into the dream space and he has to follow so that he can map out the labyrinth for either the Revelators or the Panopticon. That might make sense. Like she's just used as kind of like the bait so that he will do this action. But I don't know. I don't know how much we know about the labyrinth in regards to like either side.
Yeah.
But I think it's obviously what they want, right? Because it's associated with death.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see. I don't have any more thoughts. So
yeah.
The only other theory I had kind of in the back of my mind was like with Orpheus's death that it's a little bit different than your thoughts is like it seems like Zeba and the mom are both involved with the Revelators. There's a lot of physical attack. So maybe at some point in time there's another attack, whether it's a large scale one like this or targeted that either Zeba or Moremi's mom kills Orpheus in.
Yeah, I could see something like that. I think it'd be crazy if he just died in like an attack, I guess is the only thing.
Yeah.
Unless it was like, I guess, the very end of the book, like society is turning and that's the end type of situation.
Yeah, I guess though, like if he loses Moremi first and he becomes a bit dejected again, like he kind of maybe lets it happen.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. Yeah, because I mean, that is what happens, right? Like he's so overcome with grief that I can't remember if he pisses them off or like
yeah, I think so. Where he's like singing, he doesn't stop singing.
Yeah, and he ends up getting torn apart. So like, yeah, I could see kind of his grief kind of leading him into his death in a way.
Yeah.
But honestly, for a book based on a myth, based very loosely, there's a lot going on that we don't know about.
There is, yes, especially with this.
Yeah.
The length of this book, the amount of time we just spent recording, there's a lot going on. Sci-fi is never short also, so I guess I wasn't too surprised.
Yeah, to be fair, it didn't feel long when we were reading it.
I agree.
But that's basically gonna be it. Next time is obviously the second half of this book. And if you have your own thoughts and theories, all of our socials are in the description. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.